The most powerful thing someone can do with an avoidant who consistently demonstrates emotional unavailability, poor treatment, or refusal to commit is to simply let them lose you. This doesn't mean dramatic confrontations, ultimatums, or emotional manipulation. It means naturally withdrawing your availability, investment, and emotional energy from someone who has repeatedly shown they don't value what you offer. The act of letting them lose you serves multiple purposes. It protects your own emotional well-being, creates natural consequences for the behavior, and provides them with the only experience that might actually motivate genuine change. Letting an avoidant lose you requires recognizing that your continued availability despite the poor treatment is actually enabling their dysfunction and preventing them from experiencing the natural consequences of their choices. When you consistently pursue, accommodate, and remain available regardless of how they treat you, you remove their motivation to behave differently. They learn that they can provide minimal emotional investment while still maintaining access to your love, support, and companionship. This dynamic teaches them that their behavior is acceptable and sustainable. The process of letting them lose you involves gradually withdrawing the emotional investment and availability that they've taken for granted. This means stopping the pursuit when they withdraw, ending the accommodation of their emotional limitations, and refusing to accept breadcrumbs of attention as sufficient relationship investment. It means building a life so fulfilling and engaging that their presence becomes optional rather than essential to your happiness and sense of self-worth. The natural consequence they need. Avoidants rarely change their behavior without experiencing genuine consequences that penetrate their emotional defenses and force them to confront the reality of their choices. Their psychological structure protects them from feeling the immediate emotional impact of their behavior, allowing them to maintain harmful patterns without internal pressure to change. The only consequence that typically motivates avoidant transformation is the loss of something they genuinely value but took for granted. When you let an avoidant lose you, you're providing them with essential feedback about the real cost of their emotional unavailability and poor treatment. For the first time, they experience the direct connection between the behavior and its consequences. They can no longer maintain the illusion that the patterns don't hurt anyone or that their emotional limitations don't have real-world costs. The loss forces them to confront the reality that their defensive strategies, while protecting them from vulnerability, also prevent them from maintaining meaningful connections. This consequence is particularly powerful because it addresses the avoidance core wound around abandonment and rejection. Despite their claims of independence and emotional detachment, avoidants are often deeply afraid of being left alone and unloved. When someone they value actually leaves rather than continuing to pursue or accommodate them, it triggers their deepest fears and forces them to examine whether their defensive strategies are actually protecting them or isolating them. The natural consequence of loss also penetrates their emotional numbness in ways that words, discussions, or relationship ultimatums cannot. They may intellectually understand that their behavior hurts others, but they don't typically feel that understanding until they experience genuine loss themselves. The pain of losing someone important forces them to access emotions they've been suppressing and recognize connections they've been denying. Protecting your own value. Letting an avoidant lose you is fundamentally an act of self-respect and self-preservation rather than a strategy to change them. It represents a recognition that your time, energy, and emotional investment are valuable resources that deserve to be appreciated and reciprocated. When someone consistently demonstrates through their behavior that they don't value what you offer, continuing to offer it becomes a form of self-harm that diminishes your own worth and well-being. The process requires developing strong enough self-worth to recognize that you deserve consistent respect, emotional availability, and genuine commitment from romantic partners. It means refusing to accept less than what you need from relationships simply because someone claims to have emotional limitations or attachment issues. These explanations may provide context for their behavior, but they don't obligate you to accept treatment that doesn't serve your emotional needs and relationship goals. Protecting your value also involves recognizing that your love and support are gifts that should be treasured rather than expectations that can be taken for granted. When someone treats your emotional investment as their due rather than appreciating it as a choice you make daily, they've lost sight of your value and need to experience its absence to regain perspective. The act of withdrawing from someone who doesn't appreciate you sends a clear message about your standards and expectations while simultaneously protecting you from further emotional harm. It demonstrates that you value yourself enough to walk away from situations that don't serve you, regardless of how much you might care about the other person. The freedom of letting go. Letting an avoidant lose you provides psychological freedom that's impossible to experience while you're actively trying to maintain a relationship with someone who's emotionally unavailable. The constant effort required to bridge their emotional distance, accommodate their limitations, and hope for their eventual availability is exhausting and prevents you from fully engaging with life and relationships that could actually fulfill you. When you stop investing in someone who doesn't reciprocate your emotional energy, you free up enormous psychological and emotional resources for people and pursuits that enhance rather than drain your life. You rediscover interests, friendships, and goals that may have been neglected while you focused on trying to create connection with someone who consistently resisted it. The freedom also includes liberation from the anxiety, confusion, and self-doubt that characterize most relationships with avoidance. You no longer spend mental energy analyzing the behavior, making excuses for the treatment, or wondering what you could do differently to earn their emotional availability. This mental clarity allows you to make decisions based on your actual needs and desires rather than their emotional limitations. Letting go provides the space necessary to recognize what healthy relationships actually feel like when both people are genuinely available and invested. This contrast often reveals how much energy you are spending trying to create connection with someone who was fundamentally unavailable, and how much easier relationships can be when both people are willing participants. The potential for their growth. While letting an avoidant lose, you should never be primarily motivated by hopes that they'll change. The loss often does create conditions that make their growth more likely than continued accommodation would. When they experience genuine consequences for their emotional unavailability, some avoidants begin to question whether their defensive strategies are actually serving them or limiting their capacity for happiness and connection. The loss forces them to confront the reality that their patterns have real costs, and that their emotional limitations prevent them from maintaining relationships with people they genuinely care about. This recognition can motivate them to seek therapy, work on their attachment issues, or develop greater emotional availability. Not because someone demanded it, but because they recognize its necessity for their own fulfillment. However, this growth potential should never be your primary motivation for letting them go. The decision to withdraw must be based on your own needs and well-being rather than hopes for their transformation. If growth occurs, it's a bonus rather than the goal. If it doesn't occur, you've still protected yourself and created space for relationships that can actually meet your needs. The courage to choose yourself. Ultimately, letting an avoidant lose you requires the courage to choose your own emotional well-being over the familiar comfort of an unsatisfying but known relationship. It means accepting that love alone isn't sufficient for healthy relationships, and that someone's inability to meet your emotional needs is reason enough to end things, regardless of how much you care about them. This choice requires faith that better relationships are possible and that you deserve partners who can appreciate and reciprocate your emotional investment. It means believing that your happiness and fulfillment matter enough to pursue relationships that enhance rather than diminish your life experience. Let the avoidant lose you not out of anger or punishment, but out of recognition that you deserve better. And that continued availability to someone who doesn't value you prevents both of you from finding more suitable connections. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone, and always the most loving thing you can do for yourself, is to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices while you pursue relationships that actually serve your emotional needs and life goals.